There are many little-known railroads around the world that have their own treasures on their roster. One such example includes the Escanaba and Lake Superior Railway in northern Wisconsin, which rosters a variety of rare diesels from EMD and Baldwin, which are still in service over 50 years after they were built. One of the oldest and unusual locomotives on the short lines roster includes an EMD FP7, which isn't just the only F unit or PAL unit on the railroad's operating roster, but is the last F unit in revenue service in the United States. Whereas other rare American diesels may see some revenue freight service for tourist railroads, such as the Durban and Greenbrier Valley Railroad with their F units and BL2s, this F unit sees regular use for the small short line carrying lumber and other goods on a daily basis. Additionally, this locomotive also has an expansive history with the state it worked in for decades, going from one assignment to another for 70 years. As the oldest locomotive on the railroad's active roster for over 15 years, ELS 600 still continues to serve numerous railroads in the Wisconsin region as a little-known relic in American railroading. Considering that the newest locomotive on the railroad's active roster is number 502, an SC40-2 built in January 1980 for Union Pacific, each locomotive on this short line's incredibly diverse roster has its own extensive and unique history, and Engine 600 is certainly no exception. The story of this rare locomotive dates back to the late 1940s, where late first-generation diesels were replacing the last remaining steam locomotives on Class 1s across the nation. Each diesel was made for its own purpose, as many transcontinental railroads traveling through the mountains of the Midwest prefer the MD's 4-axle F units, such as the F3 and the F7, when compared to the 6-axle E units, since the versatile 4 trucks ran better through the hilly terrain than the 6-axle counterparts. However, these taxing journeys paid a large toll on the diesel's water, which was needed for the steam generators to heat passenger cars in below average temperatures. After numerous proposals ranging from B units to baggage cars for storing steam generators, EMD's solution was to extend the F7 by 4 feet to fit the steam generator and the water tank in the same car body, and increase capacity for both. A total of 381 FP7s were produced, with the Milwaukee Road, one of the greatest and largest railroads in the Midwest, purchasing the second most amount with 32 to replace their aging steam locomotives. The FP7s were classified as the 15EF and were numbered 90A and C to 105A and C, with the locomotive we focused on, number 96A, being built in January 1951, as the Milwaukee Road was one of 4 railroads to give the same number to 2 FP7s with the difference of an A or C, thus creating an ABA set with the B reserved for capital speed units. The FP7s were often found on long-distance and commuter routes, specifically on the railroad's flagship train, the Twin Cities Hiawatha from Chicago to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and in suburban service from Chicago and Union Station to Ellen, Illinois and Walworth, Wisconsin. These diesels would continue to roam the Milwaukee Road in the railroad's signature Hiawatha orange and maroon until October 1955, when the Union Pacific transferred its City of service east of Omaha from Chicago Northwestern to the Milwaukee Road. This resulted in the railroad repainting most of their passenger fleet into the armor yellow and green of the Union Pacific in order to match the coaches used for these long-distance services with UP. Although this wasn't widespread for some time, many FP7s started being repainted into the UP-inspired Cities livery from the mid-1950s up until the late 60s, along with most of the Milwaukee Road's other power. However, the American public shifted their interest from long-distance passenger rail travel through the mountains to car travel on the highways, as passenger trains across the nation saw a decrease of revenue in passengers, as many of them were being cut left and right. Despite this, a select amount of commuter rail routes managed to keep their ridership, including the Milwaukee suburban routes, due to their close proximity to major cities such as Chicago. Noticing this trend, the Milwaukee Road discontinued their longer intercity routes and invested in their Chicago suburban routes by relocating most of their passenger power, including 96A, to the Chicago hub, while Amtrak was formed to take over the few remaining intercity and long-distance trains. With the formation of Amtrak, numerous Class 1s were able to focus on their freight and in some cases commuter operations instead of their longer passenger services that were losing money. However, the FP7s and other diesels would be moved again, as the introduction of the EMD F40C in the Chicago region moved most of the FP7s, again including 96A, the freight service in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin region in 1974. However, at the time the F40Cs went into service in Chicago, Amtrak's similar STP-40Fs were being involved in derailments, specifically along the Milwaukee Road's trackage between Chicago to Minneapolis, and Burlington Northern's trackage between Minneapolis and Seattle. The test route, 96A was chosen for an FRA inspection train along the route from Chicago to Seattle in 1978, with 2 Bud Silverliners and a Milwaukee Road business car in Milwaukee. 2 years later, 96A was further downgraded to a maintenance service as a backup generator in the Bentonville, Wisconsin region and lost connection to its traction motors while being painted in the tomato soup red livery. Luckily, the locomotive will be given another chance at passenger operations when it was acquired by the Wisconsin and Calumet in 1989 for freight and excursion service in the southern Wisconsin region, specifically on the railroad's dinner train between Walworth and Fox Lake, Wisconsin. Here, it was named Richard C. Hill and was given an Illinois Central-inspired livery since the railroad ran along the former Illinois Central trackage between Freeport, Illinois and Madison, Wisconsin. The locomotive service on this railroad will be somewhat short as the railroad was purchased by the Wisconsin Southern in 1992. However, 96A remained in its WICT livery as the railroad continued to operate as a WSOR subsidiary until being completely absorbed in 1997. Interestingly enough, this locomotive was also brought over to Michigan in 1993 when it was leased by the Kalamazoo Lakeshore and Chicago Railway in Paw Paw, Michigan, for the railroad's Michigan Wine Country dinner train. The only difference made to the locomotive was the KLSC Circle Michigan logo placed over the WICT logo on the engine's nose, as its brown and orange contrasted with the red and blue of the Pullman coaches it pulled, and blended in less effectively than KLSC 95, the ex-C&W E8, which 96A replaced due to an HEP failure in the EU. 96A would make this run on weekends from Paw Paw to Lawrence and back for a few months before being returned to Wisconsin sometime later, or restored for some time. A few years after Wisconsin Southern fully acquired the Wisconsin Calumet in 97, the locomotive was purchased by the railroad in 1999 where it was repainted into the railroad's red and silver in October and was renumbered 71A as it joined the growing railroad's excursion fleet, at the time consisting of ex-Union Pacific and Milwaukee Road E9s, WSOR 10A and 10C respectively, and an ex-C&W E8, WSOR 801. History would then repeat itself as 71A entered service for the first time in years on January 14, 2000 as a replacement for 10C, whose HEP unit was inoperable for a monthly excursion to the Old Feed Mill restaurant in Madison, Wisconsin. After a successful day of excursion runs between Madison and Madison, Wisconsin, with Buck Guthrie, a former WICT engineer operating the engine, 71A would continue to be used in most of Wisconsin Southern's excursions along former Milwaukee trackage, pulling single-level and bi-level Pullmans, drawing in rail fans and locals alike. Art of one mishap in 2002. 71A saw a fair amount of use for such runs until 2005, when it was deemed surplus and sold to the Escanaba and Lake Superior Railroad, where it had its WSOR lettering removed and was renumbered 600. Here, the FP7 worked on revenue freight movements on ex-Milwaukee Road trackage between Pembine, Wisconsin and Channing, Michigan. Unfortunately, some of the track conditions on the rural railroad were poor and caused the locomotive to derail in May 2012, which sidelined the locomotive and put it in storage. The future seemed glum for this FP7 as it continued to sit at Wells, Michigan, stored with ex-Wisconsin and Calumet F7s, which the railroad also acquired, until it made a comeback in January 2020 when it was brought back into revenue service as one of 8 locomotives on the short line's active roster. The locomotive was believed to be brought back after ELS 500, the ex-Milwaukee SD40-2, had a mechanical failure a few months prior, which would sideline the engine, as it continues to pull freight on the short line and draw rail fans to the region. Other than a brief mishap with its air compressor, the locomotive was finally able to find a stable home on the Escanaba and Lake Superior Railroad by working there for over 15 years as their oldest operating locomotive on the active roster, built in 1951 in a diverse roster of SD9s, GP38s, SD40s, and Baldwins. To this day, ELS 600 continues its legacy as a versatile EMDF unit from passenger to freight to excursion and back to freight service throughout 70 years of dedicated work for 5 different Midwestern railroads. Thank you all for watching this episode of Remarkable Engines. Few locomotives have a history as expansive as this little-known FP7, and even fewer from its time are still in revenue service. Throughout its career as an HEP-equipped F unit, this locomotive has proved itself worthy for any task it was given, from pulling flagship passenger trains of Great Midwestern Class 1s to pulling lumber for a quiet short line in Upper Wisconsin. As the last operating F unit for a short line, or any American railroad for that matter, ELS 600 is truly remarkable for its unique story working for a wide variety of railroads in the same region for decades past, and likely for decades to come. Thank you again for watching. Credit for all the photos used go to their respective photographers, and stay tuned next time when I cover Oregon Pacific 1413. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more. Have a good day.